Hey, everybody. Welcome to this summit brought to you by the Word on Fire Institute, where we're really jumping into what this coronavirus situation has meant for the church, what it means for us as evangelists, for our families, for our institutions, our parishes, and what might look like whenever we start kind of getting back out once these restrictions are lifted, and how this has offered maybe some time to kind of think through our role, as well as our institutions themselves. And this entire summit is geared around the ebook written by Dr. Stephen Bullivant that's called Catholicism in a Time of Corona. And so I wanted to bring on Dr. Bullivant to really kind of dive into some of the main themes in the book and go maybe a little bit deeper into what are some practical ways of moving forward. So Dr. Bullivant's, of course, been with us before, and so welcome back, Dr. Bullivant.
Well, it's a genuine pleasure. It really is, and it sort of feels like a semblance of normality, being able to kind of do this again.
Yeah.
Kind of, despite the whole world may be falling in, but we can still do these. So I think we're doing fine. If we can do this, we're doing fine.
That's right. And so your book breaks down several different aspects of it. One is kind of taking a look historically. What are maybe some ways in which the church has dealt with similar situations, whether it's plagues or wars or whatever, but mainly the plague side of it. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask is where did this book idea come from? What was the genesis of it?
Yeah, well, it's the quickest book that I've ever written. I always have ideas for books floating around in my head, and always about 8 that I'm committed in some way to be writing at the minute, and they're still there, of course. But obviously in the past 2 months, this is all anyone's ever been able to kind of think about. It's impacted everyone's lives in so many ways. Especially Lent going into Holy Week. It was sort of palpable how this was affecting, the church, particularly the church as a part of wider society. And obviously, I've personally and professionally, it's sparked all kinds of thoughts and questions, and I've been reading all sorts of stuff online of other people wrestling with these kind of thoughts and questions. So I thought, well, what if I'm ever going to kind of put these into a kind of coherent structure for myself, let alone anyone else, now's the time to do it. And I was already emailing Brendan Vogt, who'll be familiar to many of you already, about something else, and pitched this, and kind of this is 2.5 weeks later. Here we are.
Yeah. And we're so happy that you wrote it and that we're able to publish it and give it out to folks to really think through this moment, historically, sociologically, also just as a church, what this means for us. And one part of the book that I really enjoyed was the kind of historical narratives of ways in which the church has dealt with similar in kind, but different in the fact that just we're modernity, but different areas or times that the church has dealt with stuff like this. So what are some of those historical moments, and how are they similar?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's any number of them, precisely because, we've been very fortunate in kind of where we are in history and place. That these kind of, contagions that come out of nowhere, wreak havoc for a few years and then go away again, haven't really been a part of our experience for several generations. But, this wasn't the case for much of, all of previous history. And so the church, either locally or kind of globally, has had to face up to very similar types of situation that we're constantly battling. And several that kind of leaped immediately to mind. There's several happen in the period in which the church is expanding in the early church. This kind of time of an amazing turnaround, really, the Roman Empire, that crucifies Christ, to 300 years later, less, a Christian to some extent emperor, and Christianity is kind of the default setting of the empire. There's a much more complicated story going on there, but it's a turnaround in historical terms. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Several times in that period, you get big pandemics hitting some part of the Roman Empire. And the one that I dwell on particularly near the start of the book happens, we know it hits Carthage in North Africa, and we know it hits Alexandria in Egypt. And the reason that this was kind of quite high up in my mind anyway is because that this is kind of one of the classic examples where we see the difference that Christianity made to people's lives. We always talk about, Christ bringing life, and actually that was kind of true in the mundane sense in these plagues, because what tended to happen was everyone would flee and you just kind of like leave the dying to die. But the Christians didn't, or at least a portion of them didn't. They stayed, they nursed not only each other, but anyone who needed it. And this had several important knock-on effects. One is that people who receive even basic care and nursing have a much higher rate of survival. So Christians tended to have a better rate of survival. People who hung out with Christians, and therefore the Christians knew to go and help them, had a better rate of survival. But also, it was absolutely noticed by other people that this is what the Christians did. And we see this time and again, not just in plagues, but throughout the early church. The Christians are known for their care, not just for each other, but for everyone. And we have pagan writers really bitching about this, and about how, the Emperor Julian the Apostate, hated Christians. And there's a letter that he writes to one of the pagan high priests complaining about the atheists, the Christians, how they, not care not only for their own poor, but for ours too. And kind of what a sort of how this was showing them up, essentially. So we see this at several times in the early church of plagues happening, and the Christian response not only having a hugely important effect at the time, but then the ripple effects from that, as I argue and hope to show, have a very important role in kind of Christianizing the whole culture, within a very short space of time.
Isn't that also one of the practical outcomes of that ends up the history of community hospitals and the caring for each other?
Yeah, so much of it, community hospitals, hospices and care for the dying, and just a kind of a, we know in the book of Acts about the care for widows and orphans, that kind of, or Paul, in a rich, writing to a rich bit of the church, saying your fellow believers in Jerusalem need your help. And that kind of beginnings of a kind of a social conscience, but also the infrastructure and the means to affect action. Kind of like, Christianity operates as kind of a big NGO in a sense, in this period when there was almost nothing else. And one of the arguments, and this is an argument that Christian scholars make, but what's striking has been the number of non-Christian scholars in the past 5-10 years who have argued that precisely what we kind of now see as liberal human values like charity and care for the other, and helping those in need and all sorts of stuff, are Christian innovations that kind of get taken up with the Christianization of Christendom, the West, and have then, gone native and been watered down or hybridized in strange ways. But so much of the humanitarian outpourings that we're seeing now, or that we see when there's kind of a famine on the other side of the world or a tsunami, and I'm not saying that any kind of that we're perfect in caring for people who need it, but the impulse is argued by these scholars, and I take it up in the book, has deep Christian roots.
Yeah. So really, the whole cause of human dignity, no matter who or what you are, it comes from Christians caring for each other, no matter what the circumstance, whether it's a pandemic or just someone sick and elderly and dying, that we will always care for the people. So the outcry to help, it's a very Christian concept, as you said.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another part of this as well that I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights on this, because it was just fantastic in the book, is a lot of speculation around what this is going to do for mass attendance. Maybe you could share some of your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean,
about
this,
that.
in a sense, that was the hook that prompted the thought for the book, because I mean, this is a topic I think I do know well. I've written a book about decline and mass attendance specifically. I've got the stats to hand, and I've been in the back of my head. I keep thinking, I ought to write a blog post on this. I ought to kind of put it all down. And then someone sent me an email asking me to write something on this, and I said, I don't really have time to do this. I've got all this chaos going on around, and obviously I didn't have time to write a blog. But then 3 days later, I thought, hey, maybe I could write a book. So it all came out of that. And basically, I think, mass attendance numbers change all the time anyway. And there's different places. You've got all kinds of different factors in play. I think there's 3 big negative factors that I think will come out of the current crisis. One is people are dying. I mean, the absolute numbers that are going to die aren't kind of big in statistical terms, but they're tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And in any one community, given particularly the age profile of who's most likely to die if they get it, we know the age profile of not only congregations but also clergy.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to have an impact, and we need to be prepared for this. It also means that there's much more of there's a greater responsibility on parishes now, because precisely that they're connected to at-risk groups.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see an impact of that. We're going to see a disruption from immigration and kind of like general migration. People, in any given month, certain number of people move from one place to another place, and that will either be within countries because of jobs, within all sorts of stuff, or it's kind of cross-country borders. And whatever reasons for that, that's all ground to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain areas of the country that get a very significant kind of immigrant boost, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of active members. And in terms of, who are the young families at Mass? Mm-hmm. These are very often first, second generation immigrants from all over. And this is even more so the case in Britain, of course. So that is going to be a disrupting influence. And thirdly, and this is something that, I know Word on Fire is very focused on these kind of the non-affiliates or particularly that kind of Catholics who no longer practice. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of research, Britain and America. We know that some people, there's something happens, or there's kind of one thing that, one day they go to Mass, the next day they won't. Mm-hmm. It might be some abuse scandal in the parish. It might be something. A lot of people, that's just not the case. They'll keep going and kind of not really sure why they go, but they go because they go, almost. And we know that when people move house or when something disrupts the habit, they might be ill for a period of time or something changes. The kids who they normally go with have moved off to college and they kind of think, well, I don't really have any particular reason to go anymore. We know that those interruptions are often the kind of the trigger people need to just kind of stop. And this is already weeks long and could be months. And for certain groups could be, much longer. And and we just don't know how this is going to play out. But I suspect that will be the biggest negative impact of all. And that, again, that will be different in different places.
Yeah.
Areas of the country where, we've had kind of decades of kind of declining cultural Catholicism, if you like. It's probably going to, and bishops kind of know where mass numbers are heading. They go down a little bit every year. I suspect we're going to see some of those places kind of a jump of kind of several years ahead on the projection, as it were.
Yeah. So what's something then that for people in parish work, or even the bishops themselves, thinking about this reality, and again, as you said, this is still speculation, but we can take a look at the numbers leading into it and try to figure out what it might mean. But what would be some advice that you might have about preparing for the day whenever we are able to open back up again, partially to make sure that those numbers maybe increase if we are being hopeful, but at the very least not decreasing.
Well, there's several things. There's some things we can do to mitigate some of the negative trends, and there's also positive things coming out of this that we can maximize. With regard to some of the negative stuff, as I mentioned before, because of the age skew of at least the weekly mass-going population in much of the country, not everywhere, and tending to be older, that means that parishes are in touch with a significant number of at-risk people, older people, people who, in some cases, mass might be the one time they see people, or they kind of like chat to people, or the kind of their big social circle is, the people they see at mass and talk to after coffee, and the kind of the families in the parish who kind of, I just think of my own parish. There's all sorts of people who we know, talk to at mass, and you see them if you see them around town. But if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't kind of have any contact just because you move in different worlds. We don't all live in the same neighborhood anymore.
Right.
And parishes have those contact details, have the details of people who I guarantee would be willing to help and eager to help. And, even if it's just kind of ringing people regularly or picking up prescriptions for people, or kind of checking in on people.
Yeah.
There's a John Prine song. John Prine died of COVID-19 kind of last week, about old folks and getting lonely and, just kind of say hello in there. It's like literally that kind of level. And on the one hand, this is precisely what we should be doing anyway as a community of you kind of think back to Acts, or you think back to the early church. These were people who knew each other and loved each other and cared for each other. And I dare say so much of that is already happening. Yeah. But if it's not, it should be, and it could be very easily. That's one of the obvious ways to think about how to. Well, it sounds cynical to say, well, this will keep the numbers up.
Right.
A lot of that kind of Christian charity leading to kind of evangelistic success. That's not why we do it, but that's the happy side effect.
Right.
It's that kind of thing, right? So there's that. But also I think one of the things and again, it's been amazing to see, suddenly, I think one of the good things that can come out of this is that churches suddenly realize that so much of life happens online. And we've suddenly churches had to happen online. And I think America's much further along than we are on this road in Britain. And obviously Word on Fire is, kind of the pioneer for everyone. But so much of life, there isn't a kind of a in real life online anymore. Maybe it made sense 10 years ago to talk in those terms. You don't go to, a restaurant you've never been to without, Googling it, looking at reviews.
That's right, yeah.
Finding it in the first place from Google Maps, kind of, Indian restaurants in wherever. Like, we're constantly online, checking things out, doing stuff, connecting with people. so much of normal social interaction. And again, there's not a kind of an online social life and real life social life, because I'm constantly, if I'm out for the day at work or whatever, I'm constantly messaging my wife on Facebook Messenger or something, or bantering with her or my dad or something on Facebook or wherever else. I mean, that's just part of real life now.
Yeah.
And the church, areas of it have been known this for a long time, but I think in terms of keeping connected with people, anything that the church can be doing now to keep connected to the people already connected is going to be all to the good. Yeah. But also, and this is the other kind of possible kind of growth market, is that times of turbulence, times of trouble, times of catastrophe are often times of religious experimentation and awakening and all that sort. Can look through history and see all kinds of examples of this. And if people are stuck in their houses having big question type thoughts, they're gonna Google it. They're gonna YouTube it or TikTok it or whatever people do. They're gonna engage with stuff on Facebook. They may be that bit more likely to click a link.
Yeah.
And again, across populations of tens of millions, it may only be a small proportion, but small proportions of tens of millions
is a lot. Yeah.
Is a huge number.
Yeah.
And I think that anything that the church can be doing to be there, to be visible, or, I mean, I've always thought that one of the most important things of social media, yes, kind of active evangelization, but just to be kind of out and proud that people know that you're, you take your faith seriously, that, you do whatever it is, that you go to mass on a Sunday. Not in any kind of like, Instagram
showy,
kind of, influencer way, but just like this is a normal thing that you do. Mm-hmm. And then other people know that that's a normal thing that other people do. Yeah. And so many of my kind of best friends are, people, who I've originally met via social media and possibly kind of still have only really met through social media. Mm-hmm. But I have this constant interaction with this kind of cloud of witnesses, this iCloud of witnesses. And it's so important.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And, I've got, and something else I talk about in the book, I have a colleague of mine who, was still is an Anglican, Episcopalian in kind of American terms, had been kind of got quite seriously into Christianity. I don't know if he was already baptized, but watching, evangelical apologetics videos on YouTube. And just kind of has it on in the background when he's working. And, the YouTube algorithm kind of started auto-playing Bishop Barron videos.
Ah.
And he's due to be received into the church Lord knows when it's going to be now.
Yeah.
But, that's the thing that's happening.
Yeah.
And again, kind of, grace moving in mysterious ways using these kinds of modern means of social communication is a real thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we don't kind of think about, evangelization and online as kind of shares and likes and that kind of, the real effects are people coming to church, people being received, and they're real. I mean, this happens. I mean, Word on Fire knows it happens, okay, because you're making it happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the major kind of light bulb moments is that we can no longer, I mean, the digital age has provided something for this moment that was unprecedented. ever before.
Yep.
That I mean, this opportunity here, the opportunity for people to still work from home, you name
Yep.
it. I mean, for all of the stuff that we've been kind of talking about of the potential negatives of it, well, by golly, this is one of the major positives of it, is this reality. So one of the people, just switching gears a little bit, one of the people that you point out in the book as somebody to emulate, to maybe see as kind of a hero during a time like this, is actually St. Charles Borromeo. Maybe you can share a little bit about who he was, what he was going through, maybe what society around him was going through.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's several saints I draw on. Some of them were kind of like, long-term favorites, and I've written about in the past, and I knew this was a bit of their life. But Charles Borromeo was just kind of, like these like great saints who you just kind of like know you ought to get round to knowing more about sometime. St. Charles Borromeo was an Italian kind of nobleman, I guess, in the 16th century. I knew him because he's famous as one of the great reforming bishops after the Council of Trent. He was one of these absent bishops, so he'd be the bishop of somewhere, and he'd never actually visit his diocese. He'd just kind of like take the tithes that came in or whatever, right? And Trent came down hard on this kind of way of being a bishop. And Borromeo really kind of took this to heart. And that's kind of all I knew about him, really. But reading up stuff online and in some of the magazines I subscribe to, people were mentioning about things that he did in a plague that hit Milan. And again, if you think of, Milan's been one of the hardest hit cities in this crisis. So it's hugely poignant that this would be the case. In 1575, a big plague hits Milan out of nowhere. And again, this is a period when you don't have, a federal government, you don't kind of have a national guard, you don't have an infrastructure. And the church is kind of the infrastructure, or has the means to become that infrastructure. And Borromeo just kind of completely goes into kind of crisis mode, corrals his clergy to kind of be, pastoral care, but also, they had to be the kind of first responders, I think I call them in the book. I mean, because there wasn't anything else. There were, sisters and religious brothers who he could just deploy to do what needed. He set up hospitals. He sort of gathered up orphans from, parents who died of whatever this disease was, and ensured that they were cared for, the infected. But I want everyone to regard me as one of the infected.
Oh, wow.
So, you distance yourselves from me, and so I can be with the people who need me most at this time. But there's a period when everyone gets confined to their homes, which, is we're kind of used to now. And because he wanted everyone still to be able to participate in Mass, he had altars set up all around the city, kind of at every kind of street corner, so everyone could see out of their windows. And if you think of like an old medieval city, kind of these are really like crammed in tenements, right? So, everyone can kind of look out their window and see these open air masses that he had all over the city. So everyone could kind of see and participate from their homes. And then, you'd have people kind of going around door to door to hear confessions behind the door. And it was just amazing. But obviously, this is given the moment we're in, this kind of is the parallel to live streaming of masses kind of thing. And it's very different, obviously, given the situations we're in. But Borromeo is one of those people who's been mentioned a lot in this time, partly because of that closing of churches as well, and the creative solutions that came out of it. But just so much of what he did, he had accounts of saints during previous plagues translated into the vernacular, and published in, again, mass produced, the kind of the versions of an ebook of the day, so everyone could have it and kind of have spiritual reading, and learn from the greats of the past. It was just astonishing.
Wow.
And as I say, so kind of hashtag relatable. So he features a lot in the book, and it was such a joy to have to be forced to read up on one of the great saints and to learn. So I've just basically kind of, I was communicating stuff I just learned that day and was excited by. So I hope some of that enthusiasm comes through.
Yes, I love that section of the book. And boy, talk about somebody to ask as an intercessor during this time. He's the guy, So
yeah, and the thing is, there's so many of them.
Yes.
And so many of like my favorite saints. Like you kind of suddenly realize that these are the perfect people, because the kinds of contagions that we're living through were fairly commonplace.
Yeah.
So, I published a book for the Fatima anniversary a couple of years ago. And of course, 2 of the 3 shepherd children died in the Spanish flu pandemic, like almost exactly 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So many, Saint Caterina Taquatha, who I've been a big fan of, she suffered very much in a smallpox epidemic that killed her parents and her brother and partially blinded her for life. So many of the saints who we know and love, this is a part of their story, and a part of their kind of how they became saints, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's huge riches that we have in the tradition.
So I guess one of the kind of last questions, and again, I highly suggest everyone get Dr. Bullivant's book. I think you'll just really get a lot out of it. But kind of one of the last questions I wanted to ask is, a lot of people are very interested in seeing this time as the, number one, an opportunity for a lot of contemplation, reflection, but also when we come out of this, to come out stronger, spiritually, mentally, etc. What advice might you have for folks who really want to hone in on that spiritual and mental side before these restrictions are lifted?
Yeah, there's a sense in which I don't feel like the best person to comment. I mean, I'm just getting through the day, really, as I suspect lots of people are.
Sure.
I'm drinking gin of an evening, while. So, I mean, there's a sense in which we have to, there's been all this focus on homeschooling. Those of us with kids have got to home church as well. And that's something that, everyone knows is important. We have the domestic church, we have all this, but suddenly, this is kind of all on us. And it's good that we're being forced to do that, because it's been kind of a big problem, kind of in decades-long decline. I think in terms of, a lot of people, for all, and again, I don't want to kind of speculate about relative numbers. I think for all the people who kind of have stopped going to mass and realize they don't really miss it and won't come back, there's other people who are really feeling that longing for the sacrament. Some of them will probably be surprised by this, and some of them, will kind of, I always expected I would, it's such a big part for me that obviously this is really genuine pain, visceral kind of longing and thirst. And again, there's a sense in which this needs to make us mindful that, again, throughout much of history, including much of the world now, so much of what we can take for granted in terms of ready access to the sacraments and an infrastructure that provides for that, we need to not take for granted.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are going to come out of this with a real renewed appreciation for the sacraments, for our pastors, for our communities, and also for a conviction that what Christ has to offer is needed by all. And it's very easy in comfortable Western societies to kind of be buffered from the kind of realness, if you like, of kind of the drama of salvation, if you like.
Yeah.
And the kind of the cosmic drama that we're all caught up in.
Yeah.
And I suspect that for lots of people, this current crisis has kind of pricked some of that false sense of security. Yeah. So I think there's that, really. But I think the other thing is that it's worth remembering that, you know, we have the lives of the saints, and so many of them have been through these kinds of situations, either in the middle of a pandemic or have suffered an illness like this and come through. St. John Henry Newman is someone else I talk about. And, you know, when the hagiographies are written, you know, this is seen as being an important turning point in their journeys, or, you know, this is an important kind of character building, or this is when they really showed their mettle, or this is, you know, a crisis moment in their lives that puts them on a new path. And 100, 200, 300 years from now, there's going to be hagiographies of people living now that talk about, you know, the great coronavirus, the first great coronavirus pandemic of 2020 to 2027 or whatever, right? And those stories will be the ones that are inspiring people then, because that's the way that this Catholic tradition works. So I guess there's that. There's, you know, we always talk about wanting to be saints. We always talk about, you know, kind of being called to be saints, all of us. And, you know, this is kind of one of those moments that really need saints.
Yeah.
So if there's a time to kind of get, you know, it's a bit like that St. Augustine thing about, you know, give me chastity but not yet, you know, give me sanctity but not yet. You know, this is the moment to step up, I guess.
Wonderful.
And kind of, you know, claim your mantle.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Stephen, this has been just an absolutely wonderful conversation. Truly appreciate it. And again, love that you wrote the book. So thankful that we could publish it for you and provide it to folks. So thank you again for your time, for providing your insights. And for all those viewing, be sure to stick with us the rest of this week, as we have several other guests that will be going into a lot of the topics that we talked about today from different points of view. We've got several parish priests that we've talked to about how this has affected them, how maybe the parish might be affected, and how we can move forward. That's what this is about. We want to offer an opportunity of hope as we keep going forward. You know, as evangelists, we need to hold tight to hope. So again, Stephen, thank you so much. And for all of our viewers, God bless, and we'll see you next time.